Today, we are talking about body image flexibility, and we'll just see where the conversation takes us because I am thrilled to welcome a very special guest. Welcome, Jess Heiss.
You pronounced my last name right. Good job.
Yes, I didn't even ask you. As I said it, I was like, whoops, I did not ask her.
No, I know. I always ask in advance too. Most people are like, Jess Hess? Hello. All good. Thanks so much for having me on. I can honestly say it's been quite a few months since I have been the one being interviewed on a podcast. So let's see if the skills are still there.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. Because Jess has her own podcast, which I will be a guest on. We did a little swap. So make sure to check that out. But yes, she is usually the interviewer. So tables have turned.
I
But I'm gonna
love
feel
it.
like you in about like 20 minutes when we switch. So
Well, when you're sitting there and I'm like, oh, I just get to hit mute and listen to this awesome person talk. Now I have to be the one talking. All right, we can
yes,
we can shift
yes.
into this.
Yes. So tell us, we're gonna start with just tell us about yourself, Jess.
Oh man, that's a really broad question. I know I like to send out questions for my podcast interviewees because I'm that person who wants to be fully prepared. So when you say open the floor, I have been a podcast host for about a year. I have a podcast called Sturdy Girl, all about healthy body image, self-confidence, physical mental resilience. But then if we're working backwards, I am also a running and strength coach. And then I am also a dental hygienist. So, all of these different roles and different hats that I wear. And I'm like, well, where are we honing in on here? I know we're going to kind of focus on body image flexibility. And
Hmm.
it's really such an interesting thing to me when we talk about the journey of body image, let's say. For me, my journey in body image, it's been multiple years of it. But even since starting this podcast, like it's been just a little over a year ago, my own body image, through helping others, my own body image has improved and shifted dramatically, even when I thought that I had a decent handle on it. So
Hmm.
overall, just the concept of body image and our relationship with self really does shift over time. It is ever evolving. So it's like people talk about happiness, it's never the destination, it's a journey. And especially where our lives change so much over time, that's what
Hmm.
happens with our relationship with self, too.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Body image, is it something that we all struggle with?
I don't know that I can definitively say everyone. I think that there are seasons that are harder and easier for
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
depending on who they are, what kind of inherent privilege they hold in the world, what's going on in their lives. There are so many things, there are so many disruptors to our body image. So I think with body image itself, so when we talk about it, it seems kind of like this big, broad, maybe vague concept of like how I view my body. It is. And there's multiple types of body image, and there are multiple types of, let's say, good body image. We talk about body image, body positivity. We talk about body image flexibility, body acceptance, body neutrality. There's all of these concepts, and they're all good in their own right. A lot of the body image research is on body positivity, but not the way that most of us conceptualize it, which is how social media has kind of pink washed it, if you will, of this blatant, you have to love yourself and your body and everything about you. And that's not the goal because a lot of people that come to body image and let's say the work, if you will, it comes down to our relationship with ourselves. It comes down to how we view ourselves and our bodies and how it relates to the world, but in a way that allows us to spend less energy on worrying about our appearance and doing more of the things that we love. And I think that that's, if we talk about what body image flexibility is, the concept of flexibility, being able to bend and shift and move depending on where we are in our lives. Right. So like if
Right.
like just go off on a tangent about body image, um, but the goal being not to have to necessarily love yourself, I guess is my point.
But you bring up a good point because if we talk about body image positivity, when we talk about positivity as a whole, there is such thing as toxic positivity, right? Of just like, yeah, everything's great, everything's just wonderful, and believing it when it's not actually true. So there's an extreme. Do you feel like we have that when it comes to body image positivity?
I don't know if it's who I've surrounded myself with or part of just the growth of my own podcast, but I don't see it as much. I know there is definitely a big body positivity movement where it went down that direction of toxic positivity. And there
Mhm,
is still some of that, and that is still what I perceive as the common conception of it.
mhm,
And where it is, it's just be positive. And it being toxic because you're not actually getting at what's underneath. Like, what does that mean to be body positive? What does it actually mean to you? And so digging underneath these layers of body image and understanding, like, well, first of all, how the hell did I get to where I am now with how I view my body and how I feel about my body? Because some people can't even identify how they feel. We just skip from doing any of the work from the layers underneath to, like, I just have to love my body. I got to look in the mirror and tell myself I'm beautiful and amazing and I have a nice butt. And
yeah.
sure, if we want to get to that point and we get to the point that we have a relationship with ourselves to where we can look in the mirror and genuinely feel that way, that's wonderful. But
Mhm,
sometimes the healthy relationship with ourselves is body acceptance. It's neutrality. So we're not feeling one type of way or the other. And it's recognizing that our body has very little to do with ourselves, right? So our appearance and how other people perceive our appearance really doesn't matter. And getting to that point of just being neutral about it. And that can be our healthy body image. And that's the whole point behind the body image flexibility piece is understanding how where your healthy body image fits in that spectrum. And it's
mhm,
also to being flexible to know that there are going to be bad body image days no matter what kind of relationship you have with yourself. No matter what how you feel about your body most of the time, there's going to be those pants you pull out of the closet that last winter they fit perfectly and this winter they fit real weird. Maybe we can't zip them up. The like our butt looks funny in them. We can't get them up over our knees, whatever it might be, and that can be a trigger.
mhm.
You can go, I mean, we've got the holidays coming up. You can go into one of your holiday dinners with family and someone can say something to you and it blindsides you and you're like, I've been doing all this work on myself and Uncle Joe said this about me, like that's really rude and it can be a body image disruptor. Those are
Mhm.
always going to be there and some are going to impact us more than others. So that body image flexibility comes into play of recognizing that those things don't have to mean anything about you.
Very interesting. I love this perspective because it's less about what you look like and more about your self-love.
Exactly. And I think that, okay, conceptually, when we were talking about like toxic body positivity, I think self-love gets a really bad rap too, because again, it's like, oh, I just have to love myself. And that's not necessarily what it means. The underneath of that, because I personally subscribe to the concept of self-love. But again, sometimes like concepts or like how we conceptualize something can hold us back from wanting to explore it more.
Absolutely.
I like to think of the basis of all of this as our relationship with ourselves. It is the longest and most intimate relationship we will ever have with anyone in our whole lives. Our bodies are our homes, for better, for worse, for the entirety of our lives. Let's make it a safe place to be. Let's make it a healthy relationship to be in. And so when
Mhm.
we talk about that self love, it is loving ourselves and our beings to say that we're worthy of respect, of nourishment, of care, regardless of how you feel about your body. Like I can feel, can I curse? Is that, might be
Absolutely.
profanity? Okay, cool. I just wanted to like, before I started, spouting off, like I can feel like shit about my body for one reason or another, depending on where I'm at in my cycle, and I might be bloated or cranky or whatever it
Oh,
might
yeah.
be. I might have decided to eat the ice cream when I'm semi-lactose intolerant. There's so many different factors can affect how we're feeling in our body or about our body on a day to day. But the recognition, like that self-love piece is saying, no matter how I feel about this physical being today, it is worthy of respect. This body is
Mhm.
worthy of respect. This being is worthy of respect. It is worthy of nourishment and of care. Because again, it's our home. And I think that that is
Mhm.
the most important thing here, no matter what you take away from this whole episode, is just that base fact. Because you're stuck in this body so long as you are on this earthly plane. And if we can't make our body or our brains, if you will, if we can't make our being a safe place to be, how do we present and interact with the world and the other places that we go and the people that we talk to? How do we make that impact if internally we can't even sit with ourselves and our bodies or our thoughts?
Absolutely. So, how can we begin to make those shifts towards having a healthy relationship with oneself? And I love that you also use the word acceptance, accepting who we are. I'm 5 feet tall. I have to accept that I will never be able to grow anymore. And why am I going to, let's say, be harsh with myself because in certain situations, like, oh, I wish I were taller or all this and that, like that's something I cannot change. So we got to just embrace that. I would also like to feel stronger. That is something I can change. That's something I can work on, right? And having a healthy relationship with how that makes me feel. And I'm someone who has shifted from what I look like to how I feel. So I know we talked about it's not necessarily how you feel or what you look like in the mirror, but for someone who's wanting to make those changes, perhaps, what is some like inner dialogue that we can start looking at?
I love just this concept of the things that we can't change versus the
Mhm.
things that we can. I really appreciate that because there is I'm trying to remember the organization that created this video. I think it's the Association for Advancing Fat Acceptance, I believe, is who created it. It is this video about understanding how bodies are meant to look different and be different sizes and shapes. And it's about it's dogs. It's all kinds of dogs in this like little cartoon. And it's talking about like the poodles take over the world and everyone's got to look like a poodle. And so there's this chihuahua who's like freaking out because they're too tiny to look like a poodle, and a German shepherd who's like, oh, I'm too big to be a poodle, and they're trying to do all these things to make themselves look like poodles when they're not, and they're not meant to
Mhm.
be. And we'd never
Mhm.
try to make an Australian shepherd look like a poodle.
Right.
We know that that's just not how they're built or how they're made. And I think that that is a really good just tie into that of bodies are meant to be different shapes and sizes. It's just
Yeah.
that's how we're made. Whereas
Yeah.
a lot of the ideals in this world are about being how small can you be? How thin can you be? How
Mhm.
can you like the ideal women's body shifts every decade or so, right? We had small waist, big butt. We've had super muscular. We've had looking like a toothpaste tube proportionally, heroin chic, as thin as possible, all the things. And so if
Right.
we're constantly chasing that ideal, it's impossible
Absolutely.
because
And
it's
thank you
ever
for bringing
changing.
that up. Yeah, because I was just thinking that as you brought it up, that the ideal has changed so much over the years that like, how can we constantly be trying to keep up? And then comes plastic surgery, then comes this, then comes that. It's like, oh my goodness, it's never ending and it's exhausting.
And I'm not going to say designed. I mean, we could get into a whole piece of society and how it's like culturally anyway. Um, it takes so much of our energy.
Yeah.
And in a way, like the how this was created is intentional. It's meant to keep us small. It's meant to keep us spending more time and energy on our appearance and on what we're eating or not eating or changing our bodies to fit the shifting ideals,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
a lot of that. But no, let's go, I guess, back to your original question before I just side tangent here. You had asked like starting the work and what that looks like.
Yes.
I'm afraid that it is not a fun or sexy answer, and it's not something that listeners can be like, "Oh, I can go do this right now." And I think that kind of deters some people, especially where we live in a society where people listen to their podcasts on like 1.5 or 2x speed to like get through more faster. Um, Unfortunately, it is the very first step in any kind of work on our relationship with self, with our body image, any of those pieces, it's awareness. And so it's building awareness around the thoughts that we have about ourselves, about our appearance, about the way we do things, about the world, how we like the foods we choose to eat. If it's something where we're talking about confidence or resilience, it's our reaction to difficulties. And it's literally just letting these thoughts come up and not doing anything with them. It's the recognition of these thoughts, because that's where honestly where the work starts, because then you're starting to get to know yourself and getting to know your triggers, if you will. If there are certain things that disrupt our body image when we're going along, we're feeling pretty all right, and then there's something that just sends you into an absolute spiral. You're
Mm-hmm.
getting dressed and you look in the mirror in the morning and you're bloated from your food choices the night before, or your stomach sticks out, or your shoulder definition went away, or whatever, something that like an angle you didn't notice before. And that can trigger. It can be something a family member says. It can be watching a movie or a TV show and seeing the same body type reflected over and over again and being like, well, shit, I don't look like that. Is that okay? And that starts a trigger, right? It's taking the time to start noticing. It's mindfulness, right? It's just that paying attention piece and being present in that. And at the first stage of this, we're not trying to do anything with those uncomfortable, awkward, sometimes really mean thoughts that come up. It's really just that noticing. Like, holy crap, that's what I say to myself. And we can use different things to collect those thoughts if we want to voice memo them, put it in the notes app on our phone, journal them, pen to paper, which is still my jam after so many years. But just start to pay attention, because a lot of them end up being recurrent. So let's think about it in the terms of talking to your best friend, like your best friend in the whole wide world that you share everything with. The things that you say to yourself, are those the things that you would say to your best friend? You're going to call out your best friend when they're being shitty to themselves. You're going to do it in a loving way, or maybe you do it in a sassy or sarcastic way. I don't know. It depends on your relationship. It's the same way with yourself, and with your relationship with yourself is paying attention to how those things are said. So if we want to shift from that building awareness and that mindfulness piece of just noticing those thoughts, the next step is, I call it the friend test. It's really just saying like, okay, would I say this to a friend? What would I turn it back around? I'm looking in the mirror and wow, I've noticed, oh my gosh, here I've just triggered myself and I'm in this spiral. What am I going to say to my friend in that instance when they're telling me, Jess, like, I just feel really uncomfortable in my body, and like my stomach just doesn't, I don't feel like it looks the same as it did before. And what do I need to change? And what are you going to say? You're going to acknowledge those feelings. You're never going to tell your best friend like, that's not true. That's not real. That's not right. Why are you saying that about yourself? They're naturally already being like, why the hell am I saying this about myself? I'm like, right? We were triggered. This concept of self-compassion, of understanding like our feelings are valid and there may be a reason why these are coming up. And then it's, what do we do with those?
Yeah.
That's the beginning.
The beginning, yes, because you bring up something important. It's a work in progress, and no matter how much work you could do on this particular topic, you will still get triggered. There will still be moments where you're going to feel badly about something. And that's okay, because that's what the work is. And then it's kind of like, now that you have the tools, how can you help yourself get through it a little quicker than you used to? Right. And going through it. And then eventually, maybe those certain triggers will no longer bother you. But I think it's too idealistic to assume that once we start doing the work, all this feeling is going to just go away and we're going to automatically accept and love our bodies. There's always something that's going to come up, and that's okay. It's part of the work that this is, mindset work.
Yeah, and it's true, like a lot with a lot of the mindset pieces of this, it's understanding that the more work that you do, the easier that it gets. I know we keep saying work, but it's not necessarily work. It's effort.
Yeah.
It's the energy, the mental energy spent on that, paying attention to thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And even going back to the friend piece, something important too that I want to point out is not disregarding the comment for yourself or for somebody else, meaning not saying, oh, that's not true. You want to be validating that, like, if that's how that person feels, whether it's somebody telling it to you or you saying it to yourself, it's like it comes from somewhere. So I think there's a piece here where we need to honor ourselves and validate that part of us thinks this is true. And then it's like, okay, but how can I help myself move through it and not necessarily get stuck on this feeling and then let it bring me down? But I notice a lot if someone's talking to me and they say they feel a certain way, or like, oh, I gained weight, or like, oh, I'm so unhappy, my pants don't fit anymore. So instead of saying, you're good or you look great, I'll lean in and I'll say something more like, is there something productive you can do to help yourself? Is there something that changed? Like open a conversation, which then gets them into the awareness piece of thinking like, okay, maybe there's something I could do to help myself. It might not always feel good because you're kind of leaning into their feeling as well and like continuing the conversation. And sometimes with those conversations, we just want to shut it down and like it's awkward. We don't want to talk about it. But is there maybe a healthy approach that you can suggest, whether it be offering guidance or advice to someone who's speaking that way to us or even just for ourselves?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. There's two parts to this. So it really depends on your relationship to that person if you're talking about like having that conversation. If they're like, "Oh, I just don't feel good in these clothes today," or "I feel like I've gained weight," or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. Oftentimes there's more underneath that. There are if they're in a season where let's say they have gained weight, there are probably a series of choices that led to the weight gain. Like just at the
Mhm.
very base of it's less movement, it's different food choices, it's more food choices, it's more stress. Maybe there is something crazy going on in their family. And as a byproduct, their priority shifted to taking care of the family and not being able to work out or make the same food choices that they were previously. Right. So there's
Mhm.
usually stuff that's underneath. Oh my God, I feel so shitty in my body today.
Yeah.
There's other things. And so, depending on who that person is that you're talking to, you
Mhm.
can lovingly guide that conversation to dig a little deeper. I think that can be really powerful. But one piece, whether it's you in the mirror, right? Or if it's you with a friend, when these thoughts come up, when these words come out of our mouths, two questions: Is this really true? And sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time, if you're like, "Oh my God, I have gained so much weight and I feel fat," which feeling fat is a whole nother conversation we could have. But those are the words that will come out of our mouths. The scale maybe hasn't even changed. Like, is this really true? No, it's not. It's how I'm feeling about my body today. And those feelings come from X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be, those underneath. There's also the other question is, what am I making this mean about myself? Because that is another really big piece of this when we talk about body image flexibility and relationship with self, is this how much we tie in our sense of identity with the appearance and size of our bodies. And I say this as a white, straight sized human with a lot of inherent privilege, but it doesn't matter what you actually look like to struggle with all of these things. What am I making this mean about me? Does this really impact my worth as a human? And that's asking about worth is a hard concept when we're struggling with body image. But when we ask, is it true? We're challenging those thoughts that are coming up, and that's something that we don't want to jump to right from the very beginning, right? If we are just learning to be aware of those thoughts, confronting them right away is really hard to do. So I don't necessarily say like jump right into that piece of it, but we can get comfortable with just like seeing those thoughts, maybe seeing the ones that recur, seeing when they reoccur, how they reoccur, and noticing
Mhm.
those patterns. When we are able to ask that, we challenge those beliefs. And so if we and they're thinking about how beliefs get ingrained, right? It's a lot. And so this is a lot of unlearning. And so
Mhm.
it's really easy for me to say challenge it, right? Is it true? And you can say, no, I know it's not true, but I still feel it, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of steps in between there. Um, But those questions can be really helpful to kind of stop the progression of the spiral. So then you're
Mhm.
like, well, no, but I'm still feeling it and these feelings are valid. So how do I progress from here? Well, what are some things that I believe are true about myself or are true about this situation? And kind of turn it around on, I'm not saying necessarily positivity, right? But like, what are some grounding beliefs that I have about myself?
Thank you. Such great advice. The feeling piece. Our thoughts influence our feelings, which then influence our actions, our behaviors, and our identity over time, right? So there's that cycle that I always speak about. So if we're stuck in the feeling, our feelings are valid. They're coming from somewhere. They're coming from the thoughts, the self-talk, the conditioning, what's around us, society, right? So many different places that those thoughts can come from. And then it's about challenging those thoughts, which, like you say, Jess, it's easier said than done, right? It's going to take a lot of effort. Is there a way that once we've developed awareness, we've started to recognize the patterns, we've started to see where we're being mean, if I could call it that, to ourselves, and we're not allowing ourselves to be perceived in the most accurate way because our feelings take over? Is there a point that we can get to where we do fully accept ourselves with those triggers still, like we were saying, like this always, there's going to be a moment or two where it's going to come back with different intentions, but do you feel like we can get to a point where we can accept who we are, what we look like? And also, does that come with time? Does that come with effort? Or is there another magic recipe that you could share with us?
I don't know that I have a magic recipe, but I think of this in terms of like strength training. I don't know if your audience is or lifters on any okay, cool. Let's say you're working on your back squat, and the first time you squat the bar, and it's really hard.
Mhm.
And then a few weeks later, suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, we start making those really rad newbie gains. And suddenly you're up to 65 pounds and then 85 pounds. And then suddenly your one rep max is, as we progress, is 200 pounds. When we think about adding weight to the bar and we
Mhm.
think about gaining strength, our quads are getting stronger, our glutes are getting stronger, all of these things. How did we get stronger? Time, reps, challenge. So, a lot of the programming that I do for clients, whether it's running or lifting, we talk a lot about RPE or rate of perceived exertion, right? So, there's a couple different scales for it, but I use like 1 to 10, 1 being like you're snooze on the couch, 10 is absolute max effort. You're being chased by a bear, can do this thing for maybe a minute. Or if you're lifting, like RPE 10 is like 0 reps left in the tank. And so when we think about lifting, RPE 8 is like if someone held a gun to my head, I could do 2 more reps. Like it's hard. It's hard, but it's a manageable kind of hard. And I'm not going to fall over afterwards, but it is challenging. So when we translate this into like life RPE, there are things that challenge us. So whether the very beginning of this like gaining awareness is a challenge in and of itself, because a lot of us avoid that self-talk and paying attention to it. Avoid our thoughts, avoid sitting still and sitting with our thoughts. And I think that I'm just like, I love to journal and I have since like 4th grade. And it's really just the thing that lets me like brain dump all of the crap that's in there. And especially when we talk about negative self talk, there's a lot of power in having an outlet for those thoughts. But it's work, if you will, it's effort. Initially, that effort is an RPE like 9 out of 10. And as we do it, those things become easier as we start noticing our thoughts more and more and the patterns and those triggers. That RPE 9 out of 10 suddenly becomes a 4 out of 10. But then there's going to be other triggers that we start to notice, and it's working through those. So it's building the strength over time, it's doing the reps, and it's having those sufficient challenges. And I know that that's like not a great answer necessarily for like how we get to that place of acceptance, because I mean, I can speak to some of the clients I've worked with, but I will say for me personally, I started Sturdy Girl in our first episode dropped like September of 2023. And I was like, I have a pretty good handle on body image. Like I have done a lot of reading on the research. I have worked through a lot. I mean, I can touch on kind of my physical journey and mental journey with that at some point if you want, but I felt pretty good. And then I start doing this research on body image, and the more episodes that I'm putting out, and the more I'm putting myself out there in this space of podcast entrepreneurship and those things, and it's really uncomfortable. Like, if you want a lesson in like personal development and self growth, become an entrepreneur because it just challenges the hell out of you.
Oh yeah.
Um, and see like these things as they come through, there's so much that I've learned about myself and my relationship with self even since starting this podcast, even since like thinking like, oh well, I've had that awareness piece and that self-talk and I'm pretty good. Even though I liked to journal, I was pretty shit at letting those thoughts be and actually sitting with that discomfort. And I think that if we can truly get to that point, instead of being like, oh yeah, I'm aware of my thoughts, cool. But if we continually take that time, things do get easier. Those
Mhm.
triggers that forever and always come up get easier. Those days, like we will forever and always have bad body image days, no matter what. And sometimes we work through them in 10 minutes, an hour, half a day. And there are some days where I sit with knowing that I am just not in a great headspace towards my body or my appearance that day, but also the acknowledgement that it's okay.
Mhm.
Just like it overarching in general, we know we're going to have bad days. And
Yeah.
that doesn't really mean anything about us as a person. And I think that that is one really big piece of this is like it means less to us when we do have those bad body image days. Kind of similar to like if we talk about the healthiest place to be with body image, like I want to use air quotes with that because it means different things to different people. But overarching in the research, in the embodiment piece, in work with clients, our goal with body image is not what we see on social media where it's the person who's comfortable like running around in the bikini or shaking their butts on reels on Instagram or those things. If that's where you get to, great. But our definition of a healthy body image is spending less time and energy on our appearance or on worrying about our appearance. It actually means thinking about our bodies less. Thinking about, I mean, if you love fashion or a makeup or those things, that is great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it is saying, like, if you were the person who would stand in the middle of your closet or in front of your closet for 10 plus minutes in the morning because you didn't know what to wear because of how it might look on you, or you're throwing different outfits around, or how people might perceive you in your clothes, to be able to walk into your closet and be like, I love this shirt and these pants feel good. Okay, we're going. Like, that is huge. We spend less energy on that, and then we suddenly have so much more energy for life, for the things that we actually love and enjoy and derive pleasure out of, besides stressing about the fact that I just like sat down and let my stomach relax and didn't suck it in.
Imagine if we could transfer that energy. That would be wonderful. Because it's true, we do spend a lot of energy and effort on deciding these things or feeling a certain way. And I love that perspective shift because it's not about running around in a bikini. It's true. If it is, cool, but it doesn't have to be. It's just about being okay with you and your relationship with yourself. Yeah.
I think one thing that I don't know how to articulate this besides saying one thing that kind of sucks
Mhm.
is the society that we live in, or say Western society. I mean, I'm not, I can only speak for living in the US. There are systems inherently in place that we still have to combat. So, for example, doing some of this body image work where suddenly you're like, I'm not going to care as much about obsessing that my makeup is perfect or doing my makeup every day or about the clothes that I wear. Well, unfortunately, in some workplaces, that can hinder your opportunity for growth or promotions within a company because maybe you don't look as well groomed, right? Like that can play into it. So when you're like, I'm combating against this, and then your workplace is like, well, guess what? You can stay at this low position on the ladder unless you want to start
Yeah.
looking the part, right?
Yeah.
Those things are still in place, unfortunately. And
Hmm.
I think that that is, one big picture thing with this. And I think that when we talk about body image, conceptually, the origins of body positivity are in Black bodies being oppressed. The origins of the body positivity movement were in the 1960s, and it was a group of Black women fighting for fat acceptance and body acceptance. That's where it started. So I come from a place of privilege when, as again, as a very privileged white woman, doing this work, talking about body image, and it's wanting. So when we talk about getting through, working through our own shit and our own relationship with ourselves, is we suddenly have more energy to help the collective and do more work in this area, understanding where its origins are and how many people's bodies are still being oppressed. Like the bigger work is there. And I think that when I talk about that, it gets a little overwhelming for people because like, I look in the mirror and I hate myself. Like, can we start there? Yes. Yes, we start there. It doesn't have to be the big picture, but when we think about like it's the individual all the way
Mhm.
up to the level of the collective, right? It's big picture.
Speaking of individual, can you tell us a little bit, in a nutshell, about your personal journey?
I'm like, what is my elevator pitch for my
Yeah.
journey?
Elevator pitch, I love it.
Let's
Or
see.
like the highlights of
Sure,
what you've
sure.
been through.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, I think that I am not unique when I talk about first becoming aware of my body at a very young age. Um, I was actually in beauty pageants from the age of like 3 to 7. Mom made all the dresses. So when you talk about appearance focused, body focused, I was very young and very aware of my appearance and my body. My mom was anorexic for the majority of my childhood years, and so that was a lot of my formative experience around food. We were very strict about no processed food in the house. And my mom's thought process with us kids was that it was healthier. So no fault to her. She'll probably listen to this episode at some point. So like I'm like, I love you, mom. Don't fault you for any of this, right? But again, not unique experience. You hit puberty as a girl. And I was my family maybe unlovingly called it my butterball turkey phase, right? Gain a little bit of weight before you grow. And it was uncomfortable. I was in ballet for a number of years, and my ballet teacher actually kicked me out of class and told me, come back when you find your grace, meaning you're the chubby kid and you suddenly don't know how to dance anymore. What are you doing? Yeah. Yeah. So that's really those formative years of like the identity around body and appearance and food and all of that. That forms kind of that core. And that's another piece of when we talk about body image journey. One of those pieces between the awareness and the challenging of thoughts is that unpacking your own body image story. And I didn't really touch on that, but it is worth your time to sit down and be like, I believe this about bodies. Well, where did that come from? I
Mhm.
believe this about food. Here are some food rules that I've decided to create, right? Because all of these things they tie into each other, right? And so that piece is worth unpacking. Ideally, you have a therapist to unpack some of these things with, because that I very much do. And there's some really like messy emotional stuff that can come up when you're like confronting some of these things. So
Mhm.
there's that for what it's worth. But
Yeah.
in talking about the body image journey, we can kind of fast forward through some of the disordered eating behaviors that go through your teenage years, the awkwardness, the all the things. But for me, a lot of this came into play. I started running more than recreationally in 2011. I signed up for my first half marathon, and it was to lose weight. I wanted to be smaller. I was in very much what the world would call clean eating and that obsession.
Yeah.
I was, code for no processed foods and no carbs, right? It was all whole foods and whatever else. And I was like terrified of Oreos, right? Um, and I did. I ran and I lost weight. I was feeling healthy and I was getting faster and obsessed with running. So that's what led into like getting into the coaching space at all, right? But there was a lot of disordered eating for a number of years, a lot of really unhealthy body image, but in the light of I'm getting praise and attention for my body and for the things I'm doing to my body. And people are like, oh my God, you run marathons? Oh my gosh, yeah, you look like a runner. Until I didn't. So you go through this like weight loss journey and people are like praising you and it's great and whatever. And then I started strength training and I started gaining muscle. And you know, you talked about being 5 feet tall. I am not a small human. I'm 5'9" and have a larger stature naturally. Which was another piece of growing up. Both of my sisters are very thin naturally. So was my mom. And so that was another like, oh God, what do I do with this butt? What do I do with these boobs? Right. And like getting comfortable with those pieces. But suddenly the conversation was, you don't look like a runner. Who are you? When the whole conversation in the running world was smaller is better, is faster. Lose those last 5 pounds and you can be a faster runner. Who are you to be a run coach when you don't look like a runner? When you have fat rolls when you sit down, when you have all these things that we like are fighting back against now. And I feel like the world has really shifted since that like 2015, 2016 era. But that was my like intro into the coaching world was who are you to think you can do this? And that was I think the beginning of the end of the like smaller is better mindset for me, looking back. In that moment, not so much. It was
Mhm.
the introduction to heavier strength training. It was the introduction to the powerlifting space. I mean,
Mhm.
that was one big piece for me um, in pushing back on the messaging around how someone should look if they're in a space, whether that's for, you know, talking about your background in dance, right? In the dance world, in the running world, in the strength training world, whatever that is. I started powerlifting. And the powerlifting community is the most accepting community I have ever experienced in my life. It is so powerlifting is like barbell, back squat, bench press, deadlift. And it's you when you compete, you are on the platform 3 attempts for like a 1 rep max. Like how heavy can you lift this thing one time? And you have to wear there's regulations around the clothes you wear for competition. So you wear singlets. So think like leotards, but they're shorts. I mean, and they're
Okay.
like made out of thick polyester material that is just not attractive. No one looks good in, you know, like objectively speaking, no one looks good in singlets. And so you come into this space and there are all body shapes and sizes and everyone's cheering each other on and it doesn't matter who you are or what you look like. I mean, my
Wow.
first powerlifting meet, I walked in and I didn't know anyone. And my best friend to this day is someone I met on that day. I left that meet without a voice for 3 days from screaming, cheering people on because of this collective energy. I mean, like push people to be like, oh my God, experience powerlifting. It's amazing. But just this thought that like you don't have to use movement to change your body shape or size or appearance, right? I've lost my elevator pitch, dude. I just like I'm like on a tangent now.
Keep going. It's
But I
good.
mean that's more or less the basis of the journey was like I started out any kind of movement in my life to get
Hmm.
smaller. And that's where a
Hmm.
lot of us do start is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this is what I want to do.
Hmm.
I am in a place now where I love running. I love lifting and not because it's changing my body, but because it is going back to those that life RPE. It is a challenge. And you can make strength training, I don't care how strong you are, how much weight you can lift, you can still make it challenging. You can still challenge yourself, and different seasons will bring up different challenges. Now, I spent many, many years being able to run and lift multiple times every week. And then we had, you know, family in the hospital, we had deaths in the family, we had all kinds of crazy health things. And just, you know, when the universe is like, buckle up, ma'am, we're going for a ride. And then suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, the real challenge is how do I get my runs in? Or my lifts, I got to choose. I don't have time for both. Or is it one of
Hmm.
each? Is it where do those fit in my life? And understanding those seasons, like that part of the journey of like life's going to keep throwing stuff at you. Where do we go from there? So that really, I mean, in a non nutshell, is the biggest part of the journey was the unpacking what I was making movement mean about myself, what unpacking what food meant. Like that's
Hmm.
another big one when we would talk about that because food, oh, it is tied into everything. Our emotions, our feelings, our mindset. It's tied into culture and
Yeah.
experiences
Yeah.
and nourishment. It's where we turn to emotionally sometimes, right? It is wild how much work
Mhm.
can be done in just eating alone. I've been coaching for 7 years now, and running for well over a decade, strength training for about a decade, and just seeing how all of those things kind of all come together and how much our body image and mindset play a part in that is amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Of course. Yeah. I guess I don't
Yes.
really answer necessarily the body image piece. I guess that's the last thing I'll add, with
Mhm.
the being smaller and all of those things. The full circle of this is like full transparency. When I started the podcast, when I started Sturdy Girl a year ago, I was still kind of on a like body positivity bender. And not necessarily the way it like toxically appears in the media, but more like I thought that that was the ultimate goal, the way that research talks about it, about like accepting every part of your body and liking every part of your body and your
Right.
appearance and all of that, and having generally positive feelings about your appearance. And that is the biggest shift in the last year, is understanding that that's not the goal. For some people, that's the goal. Other times, it's what we talked about earlier, and it's that body acceptance and that body
Mhm.
image, that flexibility, depending on the season that we're in life.
Because I feel like you can accept your body, but still want to make some changes. You can accept the body that you have, but still want to lift, still want to run, and still want to make like little changes here and there.
That's a really good point, and that's something that a lot of trying to think of how to say this without just being really ambiguous. There's like two sides to the pendulum, right? There are people that are aesthetics driven, focus, change your body, change your appearance, all the things. And you have the other side of this movement that's like body respect, body trust, a lot of the like health at every size movement. And they're like, you should never ever want to change your appearance of your body. It is what it is. And there's these two sides. And so when you exist in this like gray area, messy middle in between, where you're like, both. It is both and. I can accept my body for how it looks and what it is and what it does, and want to change it. And that's okay. But a lot of times, what happens is people come into this and they're like, I want to change my body. And then you get underneath it and you're like, you want to change your body, but you also have body image work to do to understand that running that marathon isn't going to fix how you feel about your body. Losing those 20 pounds that you think you need to lose is not going to help your body image or your relationship with self, right? So it's that two parts. But yeah, I mean, that's like I'm on a quest to build bolder shoulders. Like that is, I want big shoulders. And it means nothing about me besides like, here is another challenge that is super fun, and I just like the look of shoulder caps. The
Yeah.
end.
Why does it have to be more? Like you keep saying, what are you making it mean? And it doesn't have to be more than just this is what I like and this is what I want.
Yeah. And it's not saying like I want to go from this size to this size just because I can. Like it's not that, right?
Mm, absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness, we can talk about this for hours, I feel. There's so many layers, so many things, so many tangents we can go on, but I think that is a lot of information for everyone to digest. And even I would encourage you all to watch or listen twice because there's a lot of goodness in this episode. If there is a final thought that you'd like to leave our listeners and watchers with, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to sit with your thoughts. I mean, I think that's what this comes down to.
Mhm.
And again, I'll repeat, your relationship with yourself, as woo and weird as that sounds, it is the longest and most intimate relationship you'll ever have in your entire life. So please, please take the time, get to know yourself, get to know, sometimes when I say like sit down and ask yourself like what you like or what you want, or, journaling your thoughts, it's easier sometimes to start with what you don't want,
Mhm.
right? So do it. It's uncomfortable, but it's voice memo on your phone, it's notes app, it's journaling with a pen and paper, but like start noticing those thoughts. Sit with the discomfort. It's not one day, it's not two, it's weeks, it's months of just truly getting to know you. I promise it's worth it.
Thank you. So now, Jess, plug yourself. Where can we reach you? How can we work with you?
I love this. I love being on the other side of this. So you can connect with me on Instagram. My personal account is jess.heiss, and my podcast is at sturdygirl_. And you can also connect with me on my website. That is sturdygirl.co.
Amazing. And I'll have the links in the show notes for easy access, but definitely check her out. Check out her podcast. Look for my episode on her podcast as well.
We're about to pod swap. It's going to be
Yeah,
good.
we're about to switch now, but oh my goodness, thank you so much for sharing, for doing what you do, for all the research, the knowledge, the coaching, the guidance. It's so needed because there's such stigma and different perspectives and conditioning and reprogramming that then needs to be done to undo all that. I think, yeah, definitely you're doing some amazing work. So please keep it up. And thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.